OGT, where did you go wrong? Among all the mistakes is this list that people have complained about for so long. Hello there, beautiful friends from around the world. I'm going to be your host, Blackenfist, and welcome, because today we're going to count down the biggest, the baddest, and not in the good way, worst mistakes that GT has ever done. A lot of people like to complain about GT. In fact, you could say that one of the favorite pastimes of the Dragon Ball fandom is to bash on GT. But it seems that different people have different reasons for bashing on GT. Some less legitimate than others. But today I'm going to count down the biggest mistakes that GT made, at least in my own estimation. Number 10. The killing off of Piccolo. It was truly a sad event, yes, but not because it was the death of a beloved character, but because GT utterly squandered the death of one of the most significant Dragon Ball characters in the entire franchise. The main gripe here is the fact that Piccolo, literally being absent for most of GT, was brought on board just so that he could be killed off. Not building it up in any way, not giving it the proper respect. He just was brought on board just so he could be cast away, which I would think a character like Piccolo would deserve a little bit more. The reason this death didn't work is because it was so emotionally cheap. The show had no investment in Piccolo because Piccolo wasn't in this series up to this point. So as far as GT is concerned, just GT, Piccolo is just some random guy that supposedly is important, but never shown to be important. In fact, none of the other characters really talk about him. So as far as GT is concerned, he's just a guy who shows up and then announces to sacrifice himself. Noble, yes, but when that character is Piccolo, you know, a character that we're supposed to be invested in, it is pretty obvious that you're just trying to cut corners to tug at the heartstrings. Number 9. Why is it that Gotenks wasn't in Dragon Ball GT? Not many of the complaints that I have of GT from when I was a kid are valid anymore, except for maybe this one thing, which even today still bothers me. I don't know about you guys, but watching GT for the first time and seeing all those episodes, weren't you guys just waiting for that moment that Goten and Trunks finally fuse together and we see an adult Gotenks? I don't know if this was in any of your guys' mind besides me, but it definitely wasn't mine. I can't be alone in the anticipation of seeing an adult Gotenks. But really, the reason this didn't happen is because obviously Goten, you know, he wasn't really a major part of the whole GT thing, so you can't have Gotenks without Goten. So that's another mistake that we might get more in depth in a later slot. Number 8. Conflicting emotional messages. This mainly applies to the first arc, but it's the fact that the first arc is so blatantly trying to replicate the first hunt for the Dragon Balls and severely fails at it. It's not really that funny. Yes, I guess you could say it's lighthearted. Not as lighthearted as it should be though. And overall, the feel to the whole arc isn't as fun as the original Hunt for the Dragon Balls was. And the reason is because there's a subtext of the planet blowing up, which is actually a pretty dark thought if you think about it. Everyone dying on Earth, but in the meantime we can have this fun adventure. That creates a problem there. For the original Hunt for the Dragon Balls, there is a reason why the main villain, Emperor Pilaf, is such a goofball and is not really a serious villain. It's because it fits with the overall tone, mood of the entire arc, so that we don't feel emotionally conflicted when we see all the goofy and fun and zany things. But in GT, we might see the Para Para brothers casting their dance spell, and yeah, I guess it could be funny for like 10 seconds, but then in the back of my mind, I'm always forced to remind myself that, oh yeah, the planet's gonna blow up if they don't gather all the Dragon Balls. Kinda ruins the mood. Number 7. Holding off on Super Saiyan. This again mainly applies to the first arc, but it can be viewed further on into GT, and that is sometimes the fight's dragging out. Now obviously some people will point out GT is not a very long series, so how could the fights be dragged out that much compared to Z, for instance? And what I'm meaning mainly by that is they feel dragged out, and one of the biggest reasons is because they hold off on Super Saiyan. One of the biggest problems with a lot of the fights in GT is that for some reason the characters fight at a lower level and the show insisting on dragging a fight out, for instance Goku fighting in his base form, when we know that if he just went Super Saiyan, he would kick this guy's ass with no problem. The fact that he can go Super Saiyan and we know the fight would end pretty easily creates the feeling that the fight is getting dragged out because what we're seeing is kind of pointless. Now I get it, they're doing a timeless Dragon Ball classic of holding off a transformation until later in the fight, but you see, that doesn't work unless the transformation is new or the situation is unique. Like for instance, in the Cell arc, they held off on the transformation of Super Saiyan 2 in between the fight between Gohan and Cell, but the reason it didn't feel dragged out when Gohan was fighting Cell before he transformed into Super Saiyan 2 is because we didn't know that that transformation existed. So we didn't know the extent of how far Gohan can go. In the case of GT, we know Super Saiyan exists. We know this transformation exists, therefore holding off on it from a story perspective doesn't make sense. And from an audience perspective, it just feels like you're padding things out. Number 6. The absence of a Toriyama Sensei. You know, this one I probably had to think the hardest to include because I was thinking, is the absence of Toriyama really that much of a deal? But when I really think about it, yes, Dragon Ball GT at certain points is blatantly trying to replicate Toriyama's writing style and especially his humor. The thing that comes to mind is them ripping off an episodic plot straight from the manga, the story of when Oolong was introduced. It's pretty clear that the writers of GT were trying to replicate Toriyama so that they could make an authentic Dragon Ball story, but in doing so, they kind of fail utterly, and that's the thing. Not having Toriyama. I think GT mainly suffers at this when it tries to be funny and it utterly falls on its face. Toriyama has a very weird sense of humor that's just very Toriyama-ish. Maybe other writers can get snips and pieces of that Toriyama-esque humor, but most of the time when they try to do it, it just doesn't work. Number 5. The misuse of Baby. Baby wasn't the only villain that I think was misused, but the villain that was the most potential that was squandered is Baby. And that's mainly because of his backstory. A character like Baby that is created by a Tuffle trying to avenge his race, I would think that that kind of villain writes itself. he would be a self-righteous villain, thinking he's the good guy, trying to save everybody from the savages like the Saiyans, trying to prevent another tragedy to happen like it did to his own people. I would think that that kind of is pretty obvious on how the character of Baby is. But he isn't. Baby turns out to be a very typical Dragon Ball villain, and the one thing that I could describe him is as power hungry. He's kind of like Frieza and Cell and Majin Buu. He's like an amalgamation of previous Dragon Ball villains, which really disappoints me because he could have been the most unique, considering his circumstances, deepest, most sympathetic villain in all of Dragon Ball, and it did not live up to that potential. Number 4. Focusing on Goku way too much. There's a reason why some people joke that GT stands for Goku time. And that is because Goku has the unbridled attention of this entire series. Now I understand, Goku was the main character of the manga, he was the main character for a long time. Obviously, he had to have the spotlight, even if you had to have him as the main character in GT. But does that really justify solely focusing on him? Now some people might object to saying, well, Trunks was a pretty prominent character in the first arc. Then I'll say, yeah, that's right, just the first arc. Goku is really the only constant throughout this entire series, along with Pan. But the thing with Pan is, as the series goes along and the villains become stronger and stronger, she really doesn't have any meaningful input in the story because she's a fighter. She's not like Bulma, who can do other things, but because she's a fighter, she becomes obsolete, leaving who? Well, leaving Goku. And because GT really wasn't focused on the other characters, Goku took all that spotlight. Now I understand that Dragon Ball in the past was overly Goku-centric, but Goku was always backed up by other characters around him. When he was the main character, there was his son, there was his best friend Krillin, there was his rival Vegeta, before that Piccolo. There was always a cast of characters behind the main character, Goku. GT ignores everyone else, which is something that previous Dragon Ball didn't do. Number 3. Not living up to the story ideas that were brought forth. I touched upon this a little bit in number 5, the misuse of Baby and the potential that had, but GT is riddled with examples of this. The Shadow Dragons is another prominent example of a great story concept, especially for the ending of the entire franchise, that was not executed to the fullest of its potential. The beginning arc of GT, returning back to the roots of the series to a more light-hearted tone, I think is also a great idea. But then they have this whole Earth blowing up in the background, which ruins it. Time and time again, GT continues to put forth good ideas and then proceeds to shoot itself in the foot for some reason. Number 2. And oh boy, is this super justified. And if you've been paying attention to the previous spots, you could have seen this coming. But the underuse of the whole cast. I guess some people would say that this is a symptom of focusing too much on Goku, but it goes beyond that. The fact that literally the entire cast is neglected for just Goku and Pan, and Trunks at least gets some love in the first arc, but they all get neglected just for those characters is detrimental to Dragon Ball. I have a lot to say about the underuse of them, but I can highlight it with one statement. What development did the Dragon Ball characters besides Goku and Pan have in GT? That's right, none. And the reason they had no character development throughout the course of GT, with maybe the exception at the very end of the series, literally the last episode, the reason they didn't have anything is because they literally weren't there. And when they were there, they were brushed off aside really quickly. Now, I'm not saying a show can't survive on just one or two strong main characters, but I don't think Dragon Ball's always been that way. Yes, Goku has dominated at some points in Dragon Ball, but it's always, like I said before, has been supported by a very colorful cast. And that is something GT did not take into account. They went into great lengths at trying to copy and replicate Toriyama, but they failed to replicate this aspect, which is extremely important. Goku needs a counterpoint. He needs a rival. He needs someone who isn't a fighter like Bulma. He needs these characters to support him. And without it, the show falls apart. The number one biggest mistake that GT made, turning Goku into a kid again. Now, people that have been paying attention to the previous spots will kind of see this one coming. What have we been complaining about? Focusing too much on Goku and the underuse of the cast. So why is turning Goku into a kid number one? Well, besides the fact that turning Goku into a kid regresses his character back to an earlier stage in his development, making all the events that we had seen him go through his entire adult life a lot less meaningful, or outright meaningless, since they're all reversed in this very moment. This one moment, all that vanishes. It's like having a clean plate. Besides that problem, there's also this one. If you're going to overly focus on Goku, which is already a problem on its own, like I've already said, if you're gonna do that, the biggest mistake I think you can do is mess with the character of Goku, like turning him into a kid. That is literally one of the worst things that you can do. And the reason I say this is because this decision permeated throughout the entire series. Unless you count when he transforms into Super Saiyan 4. This decision affected everything. It affected the character interactions with Pan and Goku, which was the only two characters that are constant throughout this entire series. So if you think about it, this decision really changed the dynamic between the two most prominent characters in this entire series. But some people will still be like, come on, Blackenfist, you like Kid Goku, don't you? And yes, I do. But not when it's regressive, when you're trying to go back to it. You see, perhaps maybe, GT could have been more tolerable if Goku was an adult the entire time. Because at the end of the day, I am a fan of Goku. I like Goku's character. I like seeing Goku grow. And one of the biggest things that GT does is that it pretty much stagnates on character development, and even worse with Goku's case, it regresses. I feel like no progress is made, especially Goku. But on top of that, it also reverses one of Toriyama's biggest and most important decisions, probably that he ever made in the entire series, which is that Goku grew up. Although to us, Goku growing up seemed natural and inevitable, we're talking about the world of manga here, where a character could remain perpetually a kid, ergo Detective Conan. So going back to the 1980s and putting everything in perspective, turning Goku into an adult is a big deal. And in fact, Toriyama protested that he would end the entire series if he was not going to be able to make Goku grow up. That is how much Toriyama believed in Goku becoming an adult in order to continue the series, in order to develop that character. And from then on, the series became more popular than it ever has been, and some people don't even look back at Goku being a kid ever again. And this one moment reversed that very decision, probably one of the most important decisions in all of Dragon Ball. And that is the reason why turning Goku into a kid is the biggest mistake that GT made. Well, anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this list. I know it was a doozy. Maybe I missed one. You know, with GT, what can you do? There's always more mistakes that people can point out. But this is my personal one. By no means am I saying that there aren't any others that GT made. Of course there are. But guys, if you're interested in this video, check out my GT review, where of course I go a little bit more in depth at reviewing the series as a whole, than just a countdown video in this one. So if you're interested in that, if you're interested in more of my opinions on GT, go check out my review, as well as my decoding the GT ending, which is actually one of the few things I did like in GT. And also guys, if you like the video, subscribe to the channel, as you will get more videos like this one, more Dragon Ball segments with my opinions and me bringing you Dragon Ball facts as soon as they come out. But anyway guys, until next time guys, until Dragon Ball calls again, I'm Blackenfist, and I'm out, man. And me bringing you Dragon Ball facts as soon as they come out.
Oh my god. Sorry, dude.
But anyway.